We could hire 3 junior engineers for your salary, he said with a half smile, as if he were talking about buying cheap nails. I didn't answer. I just nodded. A strange silence hung in the room. Even those who avoided my gaze understood that this was not cost-cutting. It was being thrown out. I had worked at this company for 10 years. I was the first to arrive at the factory every day. I was the last to leave. I built the department from scratch, pulled projects through when others were already packing their boxes. I never asked for a raise. I never sold myself. I thought that was enough. It turned out I was naive. I packed my personal belongings into a box, a photo of my wife, a thermos, a ruler with Senior Engineer of the Year 2019 written on it, an old notebook with calculations. I didn't take it out of sentimentality. It was useful. I looked at John. He was already clicking his pen, timing his moment. Nothing personal, Mike, just business. I understand, I said. And it was true. I really did understand. Just not what he thought I did. I left the office. I walked past the people I had trained who had once come to me for advice. No one said a word. One guy, Tom, looked up, as if to say something. But John glanced at him, and Tom quickly turned back to his monitor. I got into my car, put the box next to me, and just sat there. For the first time in decades, I had no schedule, no tasks, no idea what to do next. There was only one engineer at the plant who knew where the hidden communications between the two workshops were located. Only one person who could explain to the client why their request was technically impossible, but do so in a way that would keep them from leaving. That person had just left the parking lot. But no one realized it yet. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to seek revenge. I wasn't going to make a scene. I was just going to wait. Because when a building collapses, you don't have to be the one who sets it on fire. Sometimes it's enough just to leave at the right time. "So you just left?" asked Carol, my wife, as I put the box on the dining room table. I nodded. "You didn't even tell them where to go?" "No," I replied. She looked at me with something between sympathy and disappointment. I knew that look. It wasn't new. A couple of years ago, when she started saying that I was staying too late at work, that I should do something for myself, it was already there in her eyes. "What now?" she asked, clearing the table of unnecessary items. I didn't know. Or to be honest, I didn't want to say. "I'll rest a little, then I'll decide." She nodded, and went into the bedroom, quietly closing the door behind her. No reproach, no support, just emptiness. I took out my notebook. I flipped through old diagrams and notes. On one of the pages was a draft for Osprey Dynamics. It was a contract we had miraculously secured when their delivery was about to fall through. I remembered how 2 junior engineers had refused to take responsibility for the delay, and I had gone to the client myself, held a meeting, proposed a solution, and saved the deal. Now Harding wanted to entrust it all to 3 young and cheap guys. Good luck to them. The next day, I received a letter from Bill, a former colleague. "Hey, I heard about you. We're all in shock here. No one even knew this was coming. Tom says Harding pulled a fast one so you wouldn't have time to do anything. Let me know if you need anything." I didn't reply. Not yet, anyway. Instead, I went to the library. A strange place for someone who doesn't have a job. But that was where I had once worked on an engineering project that later became the basis for a production line. Surprisingly, the book, Formulas for Efficiency in Mechanical Engineering, was still on the same shelf. I picked it up, sat down at a table, and started doing something I hadn't done in a long time, thinking not about work, but about myself. And in the evening, Harding called me. I stared at the screen. John Harding. The phone was ringing. I didn't answer. Let him wait. I didn't call back. Not the next day, not the day after that. 3 days later, a letter arrived. "Hi, Mike. We're having some difficulties with the Arcadine project. We need your advice. We'll pay you. We'd like you to come in just for a little while. I understand how it looks, but this isn't a request. It's an offer." John, Arcadine. A big contract. The one I'd been putting every Saturday into for the last 6 months. I knew the whole chain of approvals, the pitfalls in the specifications, the supplier's unreliability. Without me, they were sinking, and they knew it. I could have gone. I could have taken the money. I could have saved the situation, but I just closed my laptop and went to wash the dishes. Did you get the letter? Carol asked at dinner. I nodded. Are you going to reply? No. She nodded in response. No comments. No good for you or why. And that silence was louder than any support. The next day, I called Bill. Hi, it's Mike. Damn, Mike, finally. Listen, I thought you went into the woods with a gun or something. How are you? I think. You should know what's going on here. John tried to assign Arkadine to Tom. He had no idea where to start. Then they pulled Karen in, and she broke down on the first call. And today, a client sent an official complaint. John is already pale. Let him keep turning pale. Are you going to do something? I didn't answer right away, but the question was already inside me, too firmly. Later that day, I found a business card that a guy from a small but ambitious tech consulting firm had given me at a conference. I hadn't done anything with it then, but now I put the card on the table and opened my laptop. I started making a list, not a plan for revenge, not this is for everything you've done, just a list of what I knew and what none of them knew. Clients, specifications, old diagrams, non-standard solutions, patents that haven't been finalized. I opened a blank page and wrote at the top, what keeps the company afloat, and who really kept it afloat. Then I wrote to Bill, let's meet this Friday. I'll bring my notebook. We met on Friday evening at an old cafe near the office. We used to have lunch here with the whole team. Back then, I thought it was just work. Now I realize it was a relationship, and I was the one who cemented it. Bill had aged in the last few months, or maybe he just stopped hiding his fatigue. He stood up and shook my hand firmly, with the same strange tension I felt inside myself. Are you okay? He asked. Depends how you look at it, I replied, nodding toward his coffee. You look unbroken. Not yet. We sat in silence for a couple of minutes. Then I took out my notebook and placed it on the table. What's that? Answers, or rather, reminders. You want to go back? I shook my head. No, I want them to understand what they've lost and what they're risking by pretending I'm not needed. I began flipping through the pages, unconventional solutions I had once implemented to bypass official procedures, contacts of clients who had communicated with me personally because they couldn't get along with others, unfinished drafts of drawings that had been promised but never formalized. Bill leaned closer. Is this still valid? Some of it is. Some of it will cause problems if it's not updated. He exhaled. What do you want? I want them to pay for their own arrogance, not me. And I want them to come to me when I start something new, not out of politeness, but because they know I solve problems. He paused. Then he said, I can help. I have connections at Paragon Tech. They're always looking for consultants, not just for their resume, but for real work, with a reputation. The next day, I sent a letter using the business card that had been lying on my desk for a long time. It wasn't pretentious, just a short note. I'm open to talking. Experience, mechanical engineering, engineering systems, quality control. I can show real examples of how I solved problems that others avoided. Carol looked at the letter when I printed it out. Are you really going to get involved in this again? I'm going to stop being silent. She nodded, and for the first time in weeks, it wasn't an indifferent gesture. It was a sign of understanding. And on Monday morning, Arkadine's client wrote to me, right to my personal email. Mike, you no longer work with Global Edge, but maybe you can find 15 minutes to talk. We're ready. I met with an Arkadine representative in a small conference room on neutral ground. They didn't want to go back to the Global Edge office, and that said a lot. Thanks for agreeing to meet, began Thomas Lang, Arkadine's technical director. To be honest, we didn't even know you were no longer with them. Everything fell apart in literally a week. I listened silently. We're at a dead end. The equipment modification didn't go as planned. There are no answers. The reports don't match. The drawings, they're blank. Your diagrams used to make sense. Now they're just noise. I'm no longer affiliated with them, I finally said. But if you need help, I'm open to it. On my terms. He tensed up immediately, but nodded. What do you want? No work through Global Edge, personal, separate contract, transparent payment, and I choose what I take on. We shook hands. Not like businessmen, like people who were tired of being pushed around. The next day I wrote to Bill, "If you're still in touch with Paragon, put me in touch. I'm ready to talk." 2 days later, I was sitting across from Elizabeth Sloan, the technical director of R&D at Paragon Tech. "I read your resume, very brief, but Bill told me more. We're looking for people who don't just understand systems. We need people who know how to keep them in check when they get out of control. I'm no magician. I've just seen things fall apart too many times." "Exactly. You're in, on a project basis to start with. A couple of months, no strings attached. We'll see how it goes." When I left the building for the first time in many years, I didn't feel empty inside. It wasn't euphoria. It was a sober calm. I was back in business, but on my own terms. When I got home, I told Carol about the meeting. She silently poured me a cup of tea and said, "This is different. This time you're not doing it for them. You're doing it for yourself." I nodded. For the first time, she looked at me not as a husband who had gotten himself into trouble again, but as a man who had finally woken up. That evening, a new letter arrived. It was from a client I hadn't even worked with directly. "We were told that you were no longer with them, but perhaps you could help." It seemed that word had gotten around. A little over a week had passed since my first conversation with Arkadine. During that time, I had 3 sessions with their engineering team, figured out the architecture of the faulty system, and proposed a solution that didn't even require a significant investment. They were amazed. At the last meeting, Thomas Lang said, "You saved us a month and a half and almost $400,000. What the hell was that company you used to work for doing?" I just shrugged. Selling young and cheap, thinking that experience was an expense. They asked for a recommendation. "Can we pass your contact information on to others?" I said, "Yes, but without my name associated with Global Edge. Let them know I'm on my own." Meanwhile, Paragon Tech assigned me my first task, diagnosing an unstable assembly line for a major logistics client. The conditions were tough: tight deadlines, non-standard equipment, bureaucracy, and the team, half of whose engineers were younger than my son. But I wasn't in a hurry to earn authority. I just did my job. The first day was spent mapping out the process. The second was spent identifying the source of the errors. The third was spent demonstrating the solution. At first, they listened skeptically. On the 4th day, they started asking questions. On the 5th day, they started taking notes. On the 7th day, they invited me to lunch. And on the 9th day, I received a letter from their director. "We would like to discuss more stable cooperation after the completion of the project. Your approach has made a strong impression." But there was another letter, from a client I had worked with 4 years ago. "Mike, we've heard that you're outside the system. We need someone we can trust to reevaluate everything. You're one of the few people we trust blindly. Are you available?" Then Bill called. His voice was tense and short. "You know Harding is furious. He's conducting an internal investigation to find out who's leaking clients to Mike Bennett. He's making threats, hiding documents. He even wants to bring in lawyers." I smiled. He doesn't understand that no one is leaking anything. I'm just not keeping quiet anymore. That evening, I told Carol about Paragon's offer and the influx of clients. She listened intently. "So now you're the one who gets to choose?" "Now, yes." "Then I hope you never give that power away again." I looked at her and realized she no longer saw me as a tired man who put up with everything. She was looking at me like a man who was no longer a victim. The following week, I had 3 online meetings. One with a potential client, a technology company with a problem of equipment overheating on new lines. The second with a small factory looking for a crisis engineer to save a project. And the third with a lawyer. The lawyer was from a firm hired by Global Edge. "Mr. Bennett, due to growing complaints from our clients and repeated mentions of your name, the company is asking you to cease any consultation regarding previous projects developed under your contract with them. My work there is done. The contract is terminated, access is closed, and the source code remains with them. All I have is my experience, my memory, and my handwritten notes." This could be considered use of intellectual property. Let them try to prove that it belongs to them first. I ended the call, without fear. If they started with legal threats, it meant they were losing. 2 days later, Paragon offered me a 6-month contract with the possibility of renewal. The terms were generous, but I made some changes. Complete freedom in choosing tasks, permission to engage in parallel private practice, the inalienable right to refuse any project without explanation. They agreed. When I told Carol, she was silent for a long time. Then she said, "You're your own boss now. Even if everything falls apart tomorrow, you're no longer one of them, and you won't be." That evening, I received a letter from an account I didn't recognize. "Our name is Carter and Reed. We would like to discuss not a one-time consultation, but the possibility of building an engineering department from scratch, without any outside noise. We hear you can do what others can't." They didn't mention Global Edge, but I knew it was their client. Once upon a time. Less than 2 months had passed since I left, and now they wanted me to rebuild. Not for them, for myself. But all of that would have been nothing if it weren't for a conversation that happened later that night. Carol came out to the kitchen and sat down across from me. "Mike, you're different. Not angry, not bitter, just free. I think this is the first time in a long time I've seen the real you." I didn't know what to say, so I just held out my hand, and she took it, without a word. I met with the Carter and Reed representative in the hotel conference room, where none of us should have had to explain our presence. He was a man in his 40s, polite but unsmiling. He introduced himself as Ryan Campbell, Chief Operating Officer. "We know who you are, not from the paperwork. We know you from your results. We don't need a corporate showcase. We need a department that works. Not visibility, but effectiveness. You understand that this will mean a complete break with Global Edge? They're probably watching my every move. We're ready. We have legal support. The main thing is that you're interested." I was. And how? But I didn't want to rush into it. I'm not going to build a department for the sake of a department. I'll bring together people who know how to do things. No formal dress code or empty meetings, but they have to trust me as much as I trust them. That will take time. We'll give you complete autonomy. Work from home if you want. Set up a lab in your garage if you want. The main thing is results. The terms? He handed me a tablet. I flipped through it and saw for the first time that someone really appreciated not only my reputation, but also the very idea of the old engineering craft. No frills, just the essentials. I took a day to think it over. When I got home, I told Carol everything. They want me to start from scratch, on my own, how I want, how I know. Are you afraid? No. I'm just wondering if it's too late. 58 years old, starting over? She put a cup of coffee in front of me and sat down opposite. You're not 58, you're 40, and you've lived according to other people's rules. Now your first real year is beginning. The next morning, I signed a preliminary agreement with Carter and Reed, and 2 days later, I received a letter from Leslie, a former systems analyst from my team. "I hear you're building something new. If you need someone who can do more than sit in Excel, I'm here." Then there was a call from Nate, the senior technician. Then from Jenny, who worked in procurement and saved us when the factory was on the verge of collapse. They started coming back, not to me, but to the cause they believed in before Harding buried it all in numbers and supposed efficiency. Global Edge was silent, but I knew they could see. I chose the first space myself, not an office, a warehouse in a former industrial area converted into a workshop. Bricks, concrete, old beams, nothing shiny, but everything real. A space where you could not only design, but also get your hands dirty. When Jenny came and saw the place, she smiled. "This is so you. It's not trendy, but it works." I started putting together a team one by one, not based on resumes, based on memory. People who didn't crack under pressure. People who thought for themselves and didn't wait for instructions. People who stayed after their shift to finish the job, even if no one asked them to. By the end of the month, I had 8 people. 5 of them were my former employees. 3 were new, but they had been vetted by people I trusted. We started with a small project for Carter and Reed, reconfiguring the packaging line at their main warehouse. A simple task on the outside, hell on the inside. Everything was outdated, patched on top of patches, no documentation. I didn't sleep for 3 nights until we found the key weakness in the system, an ancient controller that ran on an unstable protocol. When we replaced it and rewired the line, productivity increased by 26%. Carter and Reed was thrilled. They sent a check, but more importantly, they sent a second job. And around that time, I got a letter, an unofficial one. Mike, hi, listen. Did you really get the team back together? I heard that you, Jenny, Leslie, and some others from the old team are working together again. I hope it's not just temporary, because I want to leave too. I don't believe in what Harding is doing anymore. If you're ready, I'm with you. Signed, Mark. He used to be my junior engineer. Harding put him in my place after I was fired. It seems he now understands what it means to be at the top in someone else's system. I replied in 5 minutes. If you're ready to work, not just be on the payroll, the door is open. That same evening, Bill called me. Listen, Harding has started compiling a dossier. He's serious about taking you to court for poaching personnel and damaging his reputation. He's too late. I didn't poach anyone. I just didn't stop people from making their own choices. Be careful. He's angry. I'm calm. Anger is their weakness. My weapon is clarity. Carol was sitting next to me when I hung up. Is he going to attack? He'll try, but we've come too far to turn back now. She smiled. Then go ahead and don't look back. The official summons arrived on Monday. The envelope was thick, with the logo of a law firm I recognized from previous corporate meetings. Inside were 3 pages of allegations: breach of employment agreement, poaching of personnel, unauthorized use of internal information. Under each line was a blank space. I handed everything to a lawyer I found through Carter and Reed. He flipped through it and snorted. If they think you're going to be scared, they obviously haven't been paying attention to how you've been acting over the last few months. This is a classic attempt to pressure you. None of these points are backed up by evidence. We'll respond and make a counter request. Let them show us exactly where you violated anything. Trust me, they don't want this to go to court. I nodded. I wasn't afraid. Just tired of the old tricks. I no longer lived in their world, and I didn't want to go back there, even to fight. That evening, I was at the warehouse. A new shipment of equipment had arrived ahead of schedule. Leslie was already checking the technical specifications, and Nate was looking for defects. I looked at them and realized this was my defense. No Harding lawyer could buy or intimidate what was happening here, because this wasn't a corporate structure. It was faith. The next morning, I held my first real planning meeting. Not a report, a conversation. We're growing, fast, that's good, and dangerous. I don't want us to become the next global edge. We don't need titles, just responsibility. If you see someone struggling, help them. If they're doing well, step aside and don't get in the way. We're not here to build careers. We're here to do business. Jenny raised her hand. What if they start pressuring us? Not through the courts, but through our clients. Let them. If a client leaves because they've been threatened, they're not our client. I'm not going to live in fear, and I won't let any of you get dragged back into that. After the planning meeting, Mark, the junior engineer, came up to me. Mike, this place is completely different. I was sure you'd demand reports, status updates, and 3-hour meetings, but you just work. We just work. It's strange and cool. I smiled. It's called freedom. It takes some getting used to. 2 days later, Arkadine called me. We've been told you've been sued. We hope you're not planning to back down. On the contrary, I'm thinking of expanding. In that case, we have an offer. Not a consultation, a contract, a big one, long-term, for your team. I hung up and looked at Carol. She was sitting on the couch, reading something, but she could feel me watching her. What's going on? They want us to move forward. Not just me. All of us. Are you ready? Now I am. We met with Arkadine representatives in a room that I had recently referred to as a warehouse. Now it was our office. Light bulbs hung from temporary fixtures. The server room was cooled by 2 household fans, and coffee was brewed on an old machine purchased at a thrift store. But when they entered, none of them looked at it with contempt. Thomas Lang, with whom we had worked during the initial phase, shook my hand more firmly than usual. We looked at the results from Carter and Reed. Their warehouse went from being a problem to a point of efficiency in a month. We want the same thing, but in 3 branches at once. I looked over at Jenny, who quickly opened her notebook. You realize this will double our workload? I asked. That's why we came to you. You don't imitate work, you do it. We signed a preliminary agreement 3 days later. It was our first major contract with a fixed price and schedule. I spent the whole night at my desk, reassigning responsibilities and calculating how many people we were short. The next morning, I gathered the team. We have 3 Arcadine branches waiting for us. This is serious. If anyone has any doubts, now is the time to speak up. We need your commitment now more than ever. No one left, but Nate came up to me afterwards. Mike, we can do this, but if you start taking everything on yourself again, we won't make it. We don't want to lose not only the job, but you too. I shook his hand silently. It stung inside. He was right. A week later, we were already working on 2 sites at the same time. I drove between them, slept in my car, ate on the go. Sometimes I forgot to eat lunch, and only a text message from Carol reminded me. Have you eaten? She didn't reproach me. She didn't complain. She was just there. Through short phrases, through the warm soup in a thermos she once put in my trunk. Once, when I came home after midnight, I found her in the workshop. She was putting together an old model engine that I had once made as a hobby. Do you remember this? I asked. It was in the garage under a rag. I thought maybe you'd come back to it someday. In the meantime, let it sit there and gather dust. It was a sign. Silent but clear. She wasn't waiting for me to go back to the way I was. She was just helping me become who I had become. But soon a letter arrived, not from the lawyers, from Harding, personal. You got what you wanted. Congratulations. But if you think this is the end, you're wrong. Some people know how to wait. You make too much noise. I stared at the screen, then pressed delete. I opened the table with the distribution of tasks among Arcadine's branches. There was a lot of work to do, and less time. But we had the most important thing. We believed in each other. In the second week after the launch of the branches, the first glitches began. Small, but alarming. One of Arcadine's contractors delayed delivery. At another site, a conflict arose between 2 engineers. Leslie had to rush there and sort things out on the spot. I felt the familiar weight returning to my shoulders. Not pain, but the pressure that had once brought me to my knees. You're taking everything on yourself again, Carol said when she saw me at 2 a.m. poring over drawings that any of the 3 new specialists could have looked at. If something goes wrong, it's my project. No, it's your project, or are you alone again? Her words hit me hard, but not because of my pride, because they were true. The next day, I assembled a team. Starting today, I'm not touching the current tasks. I'll remain the coordinator and mentor, but not the executor. If someone fails, it's a lesson. If they succeed, it's a result. In either case, I trust you. Everyone was silent. Then Nate said, So now we're not just working with you. We're a team. While we were growing, Harding didn't sleep. A week after I refused his personal letter, an article appeared in a trade magazine, supposedly anonymous, about how a certain former engineer was using old connections and pressure to poach clients. No names, no company names. But between the lines, it was me. I could have kept quiet, but for the first time I decided to respond publicly. I contacted the editor. If you publish anonymous letters, you should have room for facts. Come visit. I'll show you how we work, and tell you what the transition from layoffs to growth looked like. The full story. No smoke. The journalist arrived 3 days later. She spent 12 hours with us, from the early start of the line to the evening dinner with the team right in the workshop. Then she talked to Jenny, Nate, and even Carol. A week later, the article was published. When honest work conquers fear, the story of an engineer who left and built his own business. We didn't repost it. We didn't order any PR. But after it was published, we received 27 emails. 14 of them were from customers who had once worked with Global Edge, and 1 was from someone I didn't expect. Mike, I read it. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you back then. Tom. The same Tom who was sitting in the meeting when I was fired, who didn't say a word. Sometimes the truth does get through. even to those who remained silent. I stood at the open warehouse door and watched as the equipment was unloaded. No euphoria, just fatigue and attention to detail. Nate came over, took off his gloves, and said, "We need an operations manager, no paperwork, just someone to keep things running while we do the work." I knew he was right, and I knew who that person was. Carol. She looked up when I walked in the door that evening. I was thinking, would you like to give it a try? Nothing formal. Just keep the system running. You're already doing it. Let's just make it official. She nodded. If I start, there's no turning back. No turning back. On Monday, she showed up at the warehouse in jeans and a shirt, carrying a tablet and a printout of the delivery schedule. 3 hours later, everything that had been up in the air for the past 3 weeks was structured. A week later, Nate said, "Now we're like an engine, no noise, just revving." But then something unexpected happened. On Thursday, a man in a suit arrived at the warehouse. He introduced himself. "Rick Manners, investor. My partners and I have been following your story. We'd like to discuss the possibility of investing, scaling up premises, equipment, possibly expansion to the East Coast." I didn't answer right away. A thought flashed through my mind. This is it. The end. Financial victory, growth, and everything I hated about Global Edge. "What are the terms?" I asked. He smiled. "We don't get involved in management. We're interested in results. You make them, we multiply them." I paused. That evening I told Carol everything. She listened, thought about it, and said, "If you want it, take it. But remember, if we become like them, everything you've built will disappear." That same night, I sat down at my old notebook. I opened the first page. On it was a list, what keeps the company afloat, and who really kept it afloat. I wrote a new line, "Don't sell what you created with your heart, even for a good price." The next morning, I sent Rick a short letter. "Thanks, but we're not scaling for the sake of scaling. We'll grow when we're ready, not yet." There was no reply, but I wasn't expecting one. Life went on as usual at the warehouse. Phone calls, planning meetings, coffee in thermoses, evening estimates. But there was a feeling in the air that this was not the end. An ending that wasn't a loss, wasn't revenge. It was a choice. A year passed. Not loudly, not quickly, not like in the movies. It just passed. Every day was like a cog, invisible on its own but important in the whole assembly. The team grew to 19 people. We opened a second warehouse, not a branch, just a place closer to our customers in the north. It was supervised by Nate, now no longer a technician but a coordinator. Leslie managed internal processes, Carol managed external ones. I watched. When a letter arrived in early April from one of our most loyal customers, Arcadine, with the phrase, "Let's build a new production facility, only with you," I didn't jump for joy. I went to the workshop where Carol was assembling an old engine and said, "We've been offered to launch an entire line, not a project, a strategy." She looked at me calmly. "Do you want it?" I sat down next to her. "I'm not sure. Before I wanted to prove that I was fired for no reason. Then I wanted to prove that I was still worth something. Now, I don't know what I want, but I know what I don't want, to live in fear that everything will collapse again." She put her hand on my shoulder. "It won't fall apart, because now you're not alone." In the evening, the whole team got together. Not online, in person, no presentations, just a table, food, and conversation. I raised my coffee mug. I often thought that justice was something someone gave you. Now I think differently. Justice is something you create with your own hands. No one is expendable here. Everyone at this table is the reason we didn't just survive, but started living differently. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I know who I want to meet tomorrow. Thank you. After the toasts, Mark, a former junior engineer and now a senior project engineer, came up to me. "Will you ever contact Harding?" "Why?" Well, close the chapter." I smiled. "It's already closed." "He's not." At night, when everyone had left, I went outside. It was quiet. No calls, no letters, no threats. Just a cool breeze, the smell of metal from the warehouse, and the light from the windows where my people were working. Not for reports, for something that made sense. I took out my phone. A message from Tom. If you ever open a third warehouse, let me know. I'm ready. I smiled. Not because I knew what I was going to do, but because now I had a choice, and freedom.